Our guest this evening will be Dr. Gilda Carle. Dr. Gilda is the only internationally known relationship expert, and as evidence, she has authored 18 books, including Don't Bet on the Prince, How to Have a Man You Want by Betting on Yourself. And this was a test question on Jeopardy! And she's also served as a product spokesperson for Hallmark, Match.com, and made numerous TV appearances, actually too many to name here. And she has her own show currently in development. So welcome, Dr. Gilda. So nice to have you on the program.
Thank you for inviting me. This is so nice to see you guys.
Well, it's great to see you too. So right now we're in the middle of a COVID epidemic, and that's having a lot of effects on a lot of relationships. But I'm kind of curious, how does the COVID epidemic affect business relationships?
Oh, it affects them terribly, because people who have never been on television before are suddenly put into this configuration that new Hollywood squares, and everybody has to be on, constantly on. And people are exhausted. People are just driven to do things that they ordinarily would not do. So we're waiting, hopefully, until we can go back to normal. But we'll never go back to, quote, normal, because whatever touches us teaches us. And so we will never go back. We will have this much greater wisdom, and we'll be able to apply it to all our relationships, hopefully in a much better way.
Well, that's very profound. So what do you think some of the effects are? How do you think it's going to change us going forward?
Well, I'm actually doing all of this research now for my new book that hasn't even been published yet. Because what do you do when you have COVID all around you? You write more books and more books. I'm in the middle of 3 more. So what happens is that people find themselves on air who have never been on air before, and they're fatigued. There is a new dysfunction that people are pointing to called Zoom fatigue, video call fatigue. People are just exhausted. And a lot of people are saying that they don't know how much longer they can take it. They are begging their companies to go back to normal, whatever that's supposed to mean, the normal emails and the telephone calls about which they were all complaining. So this is really tremendous as a contrast. I go into companies and I do all this corporate consulting, communications consulting, and media training. And I am telling, first of all, everything has been switched to online. Now that may be sounding horrible, but one of my clients actually said he was so grateful for this because he was entrepreneurial and he ended up interacting with some guy from a foreign country. This was the only way they could have done their business. And he ended up with a 6-figure contract because of the interchanges that I taught him how to project. And this is a tremendous skill, and we are never going away from this anymore because companies have already told some of their employees, you will never have to come back to our offices anymore. We are closing down our offices when we need you to meet together. Mm-hmm. We will rent space, but they no longer want to have to pay for their tremendous rentals of these office facilities. And that's very interesting because it has a domino effect on our entire economy. So how this is going to play out, I don't know. But in the meantime, people are personally stressed and distressed. They don't know where to turn. They haven't all had the training to project themselves on camera, online. They have no idea what they're doing. And some of the meeting planners don't know what they're doing either because the meetings are too long. These are all the complaints that people are making. The meetings are too long. They're too exhausting. People go on and on. People are talking over one another. Well, shut up. And of course, we're not talking about the fact that, the kids are barging in the room and the dog is barking and the phones are going off because of deliveries you're expecting, et cetera, et cetera. And what's more, we found that they are spending 1 hour more on average working and working and working. And if you're an entrepreneur, as everybody on this show is, you know that you're working 24/7 anyway. I see clients here on Hollywood Squares. I see them on Saturdays and Sundays in the mornings before their regular day begins, et cetera, et cetera. We're all bending over backwards to try to service people, and especially in my profession, they are in need. They are in terrible need of this kind of service.
Well, I have to agree. You did leave out one complaint that I heard from one of my friends lately, who I've never met in person, by the way. We've just met through networking on Zoom. She was on a Zoom networking call, and a man got up to do something, and he was in his boxers. And she was appalled, and she was like, nobody on that call is ever going to look at this guy the same way again.
It's not unusual, but I have to tell you, I've been on maybe thousands of shows, and I have to say that very often when we're doing talking heads, nobody knows that we're wearing undies underneath. Nobody knows that. And you think you can get away with it, but every once in a while you have an oops.
So the other thing I wanted to say based on your comments was, I got to tell you, I do a lot of Zoom calls. I do Zoom interviews for my business. It is such a relief to do a regular phone call. I gotta tell you.
That's right.
You're right. And then, so you work with corporations, but what Richard found when he started his law firm, we both came from corporate, was that a lot of corporate ideas and procedures translate across all size business, and we've incorporated them into your Heart Law. So what do you say to entrepreneurs about their relationship skills based on what you say to corporations?
Well, it's the same exact thing. As a matter of fact, this is why I do relationship counseling, and I also do relationship strategy work in companies, because it's all the same. I didn't even know I had this kind of business going when I first started out. A client said, "Oh, you have helped me so much, Dr. Gilda, with my personal relationship." I said, "What are you talking about?" We were in this big company. And I said, "What are you talking about? I don't think I've ever mentioned your personal relationship." He said, "It's all the same." And he pointed to me something that I hadn't even realized. Here I was doing all this corporate work, and I hadn't realized the need to commingle the interpersonal relationships that we have at home with the interpersonal relationships that we have for the bottom line. Because everything, every dysfunction, every wart, every pimple you have going on at home is going to spill over to the business that you're supposedly doing. So you can't help but join those two together. And heretofore, we have always been told that leave your personal stuff at home, and we have to only worry about business things at work. And yet empathy rated very, very high as something that companies are looking towards in their people. Years ago, you never heard that. When I started teaching MBA courses, nobody was allowed to talk about empathy, but now this is the word. So wow. Things have, the lines of demarcation have truly blurred, and you cannot segment your personal from your professional. So I have had, by dint of necessity, to service both of these aspects.
So Dr. Gilda, that's such an interesting point. And I wanted to ask you, how do you counsel couples who are both working, who have stressful jobs, especially if they're working from home now? How do you counsel them to interact so they're just not totally on each other's nerves, or and how do they maintain the relationship under these kinds of circumstances?
Well, here's where planning has got to come in. Very, very specific planning. You say to the kids, look, this is going to be where you're going to do your homework. And you say to him and you say to her, this is where you're going to do your work. This is where I'm going to be doing my work. And of course, there's always trespassing. So everybody's nerves are raw and on edge. And we have to get them to take a back seat and just breathe and understand you have one roof and lots of personalities underneath that roof. And how are you going to get along? Now, in the past, these interpersonal relationships, we didn't even know people weren't getting along because you had the buffer of work. You saw each other in the morning, you saw each other at night, and all of a sudden, with pandemic, you're looking at each other and saying, who is this person? You barely know them. You barely know your children. And it's an eye opener that when people start to find out who they're relating to, some of them say, I'm out of here. Some of them have called their lawyers. Some of them have called me. Listen, I need some emergency work to do with you. Because they don't even know these people, because we've been working and working and working so hard all these years.
Well, I got to say, Richard has gone into the office every single day because we have the building. So he kicked everybody else out. And I've worked from home. But I know Kenya has.
Wait a minute, what are you saying?
I know Kenya has something to say. Kenya.
I was thinking about what you were saying in regards to relationships to other people and how that's changed since everybody's been quarantining and working from home. But one of the things I thought of while you were saying that was like the relationships with ourselves, right?
Oh,
so I think that has changed so much because we're in solitude. We don't have people around us to kind of distract ourselves from ourselves. So how would you say that has shifted and changed since people have been quarantining and working from home?
I am so glad you brought that up, because the most important relationship that we have with anybody starts with us. And you cannot say, I am an entrepreneur, unless you capitalize that I. Because if you are saying, well, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm working from home, and this, you know what? We attract not who we want, but who we are. We attract whatever we put out. So if you're coming across with a lowercase I, you're going to be attracting lowercase losers in love, in at work. You are just going to keep attracting all these people with similar lowercase i's. So the antidote to getting rid of all the people that you're attracting and you can't understand why, is to make yourself a capital I. I have a capital I on my door before I leave every day. And people say, what is that? Why do you have that capital I? I said, because I have triplet nieces. Now they're 10 years old. And when they leave, I say, where are you? Where's that capital I? Now, I have done this training with salespeople, with entrepreneurs, with women's groups, with so many different people. And you'd be surprised when I say to a live audience, remember those? When I say to a live audience, okay, let me see your capital I. All of a sudden, you see people start to levitate because they're thinking so much better about themselves. I remember training a group of female entrepreneurs in Manhattan, and there was standing room only. I was doing this training and standing room only. And I said to them, okay, now we're going to do the power stare. And they were lined up after we had to send them out after breakfast. There was a breakfast meeting. And I said, do you think Manhattan will ever be the same after that? Oh my God, look what I've done. But it all begins Kenya, perfect question. It all begins with us. And if we're no good for us, then that's where we start. We are not going to maintain healthy relationships at business or at home with our children, with our neighbors, with anybody until we really spend time on that. And I can't tell you how many seminars I have run with entrepreneurial men who have sat there and said, well, I'm not getting a raise and I'm not getting a this and I'm not getting, and my boss, and all I do is say, have you ever had this conversation with your boss? And the men have never been trained to ask for what they want or ask for what they believe they deserve. And they said to me, the boss should know.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit sometimes I get the power stare too. So, but no, that's really fascinating. So, what makes for a good relationship?
Well, haven't we all seen when somebody says in a personal relationship, well, you should know how I feel. Well, what are you, Svengali? How is that person supposed to know? Come on, you can't expect somebody to just know exactly what's in your head. You've got to say this. And we are reluctant to share our feelings for fear of being hurt. And when I start even my media coaching, I say to a client, what are your feelings and what are your fears? And most of them will say, I don't have any feelings or fears. I don't have to worry about it. And then we do our work.
So do you deal with individuals as well? Do you coach just individuals or is it just groups?
Oh, no. Lots of individuals and a lot of, I do that internationally. So a lot of my individuals, one is running a country, another is, and they love using me because I'm out of the country and nobody can find me. So, then they're not going to be followed by the media. Another is an attorney in another country. I could go on and on and on. And it's wonderful what we can do online. I never thought the online would work, frankly, but wow, you are so intense. And in 30 minutes, man, I could get started and wind somebody up and push them out the door to feel that much better.
Can you teach us the power stare virtually? Is that something?
I sure can. That is also, by the way, in my book, Don't Bet on the Prince, which I have used. It's been published in so many different languages across the world. And I have used that in my MBA programs as well, because while it sounds like it's a woman's self-help book, because the subtitle says how to have the man you want by betting on yourself, it really has been, as I have applied this information to how to have the job you have by betting on yourself, how to have the career you have by betting on yourself. Everything has to be betting on you first. And the power stare is like this. You stare at somebody. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see this all that well on this camera, but I'm staring at somebody. I turn my head a little bit. I continue to stare. And then I fold my head down just a little bit.
Oh, I'm going to practice that.
Let me show you something.
I think I got it down.
Well, I
think
started.
my cat uses that on me.
Now you know what it's called. I started my career as a 20-year-old teaching in the South Bronx, the worst neighborhood in the world. Loved the kids, but oh goodness, the neighborhood was terrible, and the administrators didn't know what they were doing. And so I did everything. I never colored inside the lines. I always colored outside the box. I always did wild and weird things. And my kids were not reading. They weren't writing. They were totally illiterate. And I had them reading newspapers by the time they ended their classes because I didn't accept mediocrity in any way.
That is an absolutely wonderful story. And we have to take a commercial break right now. What we hope that you'll stick around and help give advice to some of our other presenters and guests. So
And us.
and us, yes, I'm going to use that
I'm not
power
beyond
stare
advice.
back at the cat now. Next time, you're listening to Passage to Profit with Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart on WOR 710, the Voice of New York. We'll be right back after this commercial break.